The morning light filtered through the blinds in Elaine Montgomery's office, casting thin stripes across the stack of case files on her desk. She rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the clock. It was already past 6 in the evening, and she had been reviewing documents since 7 that morning. 11 hours straight with just a 20-minute break for a sandwich at her desk. But that's who she was, thorough, dedicated, unwavering in her commitment to justice. As one of only 3 black female judges in the county circuit court, Elaine had spent 15 years building a reputation for fairness and precision. She knew the burden she carried. Every ruling, every decision was scrutinized not just because she was a judge, but because she was a black woman in a position of power. The pressure never eased, not even after all these years. Judge Montgomery, her clerk Thomas poked his head in. "I'm heading out." "You should too. Big day tomorrow with the Wilson case." Elaine smiled and nodded. "Just finishing up these notes." "You go ahead." Thomas hesitated. "It's getting dark, Judge. You've been at it all day." I know. My sister's expecting me for dinner anyway. I'll leave in 10 minutes, promise." After Thomas left, Elaine leaned back in her chair and sighed deeply. The Wilson case was complicated, a dispute over property lines that had escalated into something ugly between neighbors. Both sides had valid points, both had flaws in their arguments. These were the cases that kept her up at night. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Patricia. "Food's getting cold. You better not be still at work." Elaine chuckled and typed back, "On my way soon. Save me some of that peach cobbler." She packed her notes into her leather bag, the one her father had given her when she passed the bar exam, and switched off her desk lamp. The courthouse was quiet now, most staff having left hours ago. Her footsteps echoed in the marble hallway as she made her way out, nodding to the security guard at the front desk. "Another late night, Judge Montgomery?" he asked. "The work doesn't do itself, Joe," she replied with a tired smile. "Drive safe now." In the parking garage, Elaine slipped into her personal car, a modest navy blue sedan she'd bought 3 years ago. Her official vehicle was in for maintenance, but she preferred driving her own car anyway. It felt normal, ordinary. In it, she wasn't Judge Montgomery. She was just Elaine. As she drove, she let her mind wander to her childhood. Growing up in the south side of the city, where expectations for black girls weren't aimed at judicial robes. Her mother had cleaned houses. Her father drove a delivery truck, both working impossible hours to make sure their 3 daughters had opportunities they never did. Elaine had been the middle child, too stubborn to follow, too cautious to lead. Her older sister had become a doctor. Her younger sister owned a successful bakery. The Montgomery girls, as people called them, had defied every expectation. Elaine turned onto the highway, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Patricia lived in Oakwood Heights, an affluent suburb about 30 minutes from downtown. The neighborhood was known for its large houses, manicured lawns, and unfortunately, its lack of diversity. Patricia and her husband had moved there 5 years ago, attracted by the good schools for their 2 children. They were one of only 4 black families in the entire development. The radio played softly in the background, a jazz station that reminded Elaine of Sunday afternoons at her grandmother's house. She loosened her collar and kicked off her heels as she drove, letting them fall to the passenger side floor. After a day of being perfectly composed, these small freedoms felt enormous. Her phone rang through the car speakers. It was Patricia again. "Where are you?" her sister demanded without preamble. "Hello to you too," Elaine laughed. "I'm on the highway. Should be there in about 15 minutes. Well, hurry up. The kids are asking about their favorite aunt, and Robert's already opened the wine." "Robert opened wine on a Wednesday? Must be a special occasion," Patricia's voice softened. "It is. We're celebrating you, sis. The Wilson case is a big deal, and we're proud of you." Elaine felt a lump in her throat. "You don't even know my ruling yet." "Doesn't matter. We know you'll do what's right. You always do." After they hung up, Elaine drove in silence, her sister's words echoing in her mind. The responsibility of doing what was right. It was both a burden and a privilege. She took the exit toward Oakwood Heights, the streetlights becoming more spaced out as luxury cars replaced buses and apartments gave way to sprawling homes. She glanced at herself in the rearview mirror. She had changed into casual clothes before leaving the courthouse, a simple navy blouse and black pants, but her pearl earrings remained, a small reminder of her position. She should have taken them off too, she thought. In this neighborhood, she preferred to blend in as much as possible, though experience had taught her that was nearly impossible. The streets of Oakwood Heights were quiet, almost eerily so. Each house sat back from the road, protected by elaborate landscaping and winding driveways. Elaine always felt a strange mixture of admiration and discomfort here. She respected her sister's choice to live where she wanted, where her children could have every advantage. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, evaluated, judged as not belonging. As she turned onto Maple Avenue, where Patricia lived, she noticed a police cruiser parked at the corner. This wasn't unusual. The neighborhood had a strong police presence, one of its selling points for residents. Safety and security were priorities here, though Elaine often wondered safety for whom? Security from what? She slowed down as she passed the cruiser, maintaining exactly the speed limit. It was an instinct born from a lifetime of caution. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. When you see police, you be extra careful. No sudden movements. No speeding. Keep your hands where they can see them. Lessons she had learned early and never forgotten, even with a law degree and a judge's title. The cruiser pulled out behind her, probably just patrolling, she told herself, but she double-checked her speed anyway. Exactly 25 mph in a 25 zone. Her registration was current, her taillights working. There was no reason to be stopped. The police car followed her for 2 blocks. Elaine's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Just go about your business, she thought. You've done nothing wrong. When the blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, her heart sank. She pulled over immediately, positioning her car properly at the curb. The training kicked in, the training every black parent gives their child. She turned off the engine, turned on the interior light, placed her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel and waited. In her mind, she ran through possible reasons for being stopped. No broken lights, no expired tags, no speeding. Perhaps they were looking for someone else, someone whose car matched hers. Perhaps it was just a random check. Through her side mirror, she watched an officer approach. He was young, maybe early 30s, with short cropped hair and broad shoulders. His hand rested casually on his holster, a detail that made Elaine's mouth go dry. License and registration, he said before she could even roll her window all the way down. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. May I ask why I've been pulled over, officer? Elaine kept her voice steady and polite. License and registration first, he repeated, a edge to his voice. Of course. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now, okay? She narrated her movements clearly, another lesson from childhood. The officer didn't respond, just watched impassively as she retrieved her documents. She handed them over, careful to move slowly. What are you doing in this neighborhood? He asked, studying her license. I'm going to my sister's house for dinner. She lives on Maple Avenue. The officer looked skeptical. And where are you coming from? Downtown. I work at the county courthouse. What do you do there? His tone suggested he didn't believe her. Elaine hesitated. She never liked to lead with her title, especially in situations like this, but she also knew that in some cases it provided necessary protection. I'm an attorney, she said simply, deciding to hold back. Let this play out naturally. A second officer approached from the passenger side, shining a flashlight into her car. Elaine squinted against the sudden brightness. Everything all right, Reynolds? The second officer asked. Just checking things out, the first officer, Reynolds, replied. Says she's going to her sister's house. At this hour? Elaine glanced at her watch. It was barely 7:30 p.m. It's dinner time, she said, trying to keep the disbelief out of her voice. Is there a curfew I'm not aware of? The question was a mistake. Both officers stiffened. Step out of the car, please, Officer Reynolds said. May I ask why? Step out of the car now, ma'am. The ma'am was clipped, almost sarcastic. Elaine knew her rights, knew she could ask for a reason, knew this stop was problematic from the start. But she also knew the reality of being black in America. She opened her door slowly. I'm stepping out now, she narrated, standing up with deliberate care. As she stood on the pristine sidewalk of Oakwood Heights, the weight of what was happening settled on her shoulders. This wasn't about a traffic violation. This wasn't about safety. This was about who belonged in this neighborhood and who didn't, at least in the eyes of these officers. In that moment, the irony wasn't lost on her. Tomorrow morning, she would put on her robes and preside over a case about property lines, about who had the right to be where. And tonight, on this quiet street, She was being questioned about that very same right. The peach cobbler at her sister's house was getting cold. Her brother-in-law had opened wine. Her niece and nephew were waiting to tell her about their school day. And here she was, standing next to her car, about to become another story, another statistic, another example. Judge Elaine Montgomery took a deep breath and prepared to navigate what came next with the same calm deliberation she brought to her courtroom. The night was just beginning. The cool evening air hit Elaine's face as she stood beside her car. Officer Reynolds still held her license and registration, studying them with exaggerated care while his partner circled her vehicle, shining his flashlight through the windows. "What's in the bag?" the second officer asked, pointing to her leather briefcase on the passenger seat. "Work documents. Court files," Elaine replied calmly. "I told you I work at the courthouse." Officer Reynolds snorted. "Right. And I'm the mayor." He handed her documents to his partner. "Run these, Barker. Let's see if everything checks out." As Officer Barker returned to their cruiser, Reynolds continued his questioning. "How long have you owned this vehicle?" 3 years. "Any weapons in the car?" "No." "Drugs?" "Alcohol?" Elaine felt her patience wearing thin. "No, officer, I'd really like to know why I was pulled over." Reynolds ignored her question. "Where did you say your sister lives?" 82 Maple Avenue. It's 3 blocks from here. "And what's her name?" "Patricia Taylor." Elaine shifted her weight, conscious of how long she'd been standing on the curb. Neighbors in nearby houses had begun to notice. A couple walking their dog on the other side of the street slowed down to watch. A man retrieving his mail paused by his mailbox, eyes fixed on the scene. "You seem nervous," Reynolds remarked. "I'm not nervous. I'm late for dinner." Officer Barker returned, his expression hard to read in the growing darkness. He whispered something to Reynolds, who nodded. "Ms. Montgomery, do you know why people in this neighborhood pay such high property taxes?" Reynolds asked, his tone suddenly conversational. Elaine didn't answer. She knew where this was headed. For safety, security. They pay good money so they don't have to worry about unexpected visitors. "I'm not an unexpected visitor. I'm going to my sister's house for dinner, as I've told you multiple times. Well, we've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. Break-ins. You understand we need to be thorough. My car was not reported as suspicious because I just arrived. I was driving at the speed limit and obeying all traffic laws. There was no legitimate reason to pull me over." Reynolds' face hardened. "You telling me how to do my job?" "I'm stating facts, officer." Barker stepped closer. "Why don't you call your sister? Have her come verify who you are." Elaine reached for her phone, but Reynolds held up his hand. "Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." She dialed Patricia's number, putting the phone on speaker. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Patricia was probably helping the kids with homework or finishing dinner preparations. Elaine tried again with the same result. "No answer," Reynolds said with exaggerated concern. "That's unfortunate." "Try her husband," Barker suggested. Elaine didn't have Robert's number memorized. It was stored in her phone. As she scrolled through her contacts, Reynolds suddenly reached out and grabbed the device from her hand. "What are you doing?" Elaine protested. "You were acting suspicious." "I was looking for my brother-in-law's number, as Officer Barker suggested." Reynolds scrolled through her phone. "Lot of contacts here. District Attorney Washington? Public Defender's Office. You know these people?" "Yes, through my work." "I told you I work at the courthouse." "As what, a secretary?" The casual dismissal stung, but Elaine kept her composure. "I'm an attorney." "Where's your business card, then?" "Your fancy lawyer suit?" Reynolds looked pointedly at her casual clothes. "I change before leaving work. My ID badge is in my bag if you'd like to see it." "Convenient," Barker muttered. Reynolds handed her phone to his partner. "Check her recent calls messages. See if anything looks suspicious." "You need a warrant for that," Elaine said firmly. Both officers laughed. "Look at her thinking she knows the law," Barker said. "I do know the law," Elaine replied, her voice steady despite her rising anger. "And what you're doing right now is illegal." Reynolds stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You accusing officers of the law of illegal behavior? That's a serious claim." "It's not a claim. It's a fact. You had no probable cause to stop me. You're searching my phone without consent or a warrant. And you're detaining me without reasonable suspicion of a crime. You were driving suspiciously in a high-value neighborhood." "How exactly was my driving suspicious?" You slowed down when you passed our cruiser. I was maintaining the speed limit. The conversation was going in circles. More neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching from a distance. Some had phones out, possibly recording. Elaine noticed a young white couple approach, looking concerned. "Is everything okay here?" the man called out. Reynolds turned. "Police business, sir. Please step back." "We're fine," Elaine added, not wanting the situation to escalate further. The couple hesitated, then retreated to their porch, still watching. Barker had finished examining her phone and whispered something to Reynolds again. Reynolds nodded and turned back to Elaine. "Ms. Montgomery, we're going to need you to come down to the station with us." "On what charges?" "Suspicious behavior, resisting an officer, and possible possession of a stolen vehicle." Elaine couldn't believe what she was hearing. "That's absurd. I've cooperated fully, provided identification, and this is my car. I've owned it for 3 years. The registration shows the car belongs to Elaine Montgomery, but you haven't sufficiently proven that's who you are. My driver's license has my photo on it. IDs can be faked," Barker said with a shrug. "And you don't look like someone who would own a car like this." The blatant racism of the statement hung in the air. Elaine took a deep breath. "Officer Barker, are you implying that as a black woman I couldn't possibly own this car legally?" "Don't put words in my mouth," Barker snapped. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. This is harassment and racial profiling. I want to speak to your supervisor." "You can do that at the station," Reynolds said, reaching for his handcuffs. "Now turn around." Elaine knew she had 2 choices. She could reveal her position as a judge right now, which might end this immediately, or she could comply and deal with this through proper channels later. The latter would give her more insight into how these officers typically behaved when they thought no one with power was watching. She turned around. "Hands behind your back," Reynolds ordered. As the cold metal closed around her wrists, Elaine thought about how many people experienced this same treatment without the protection her position would ultimately provide. The thought made her sick. "This is completely unnecessary," she said as Reynolds guided her toward the police cruiser. "You should have cooperated from the beginning," he replied. "I did cooperate. I answered all your questions and provided identification." Reynolds opened the back door of the cruiser. "Watch your head." The interior of the police car smelled like sweat and artificial pine. The plastic seat was hard and uncomfortable, especially with her hands cuffed behind her back. Through the window, Elaine could see Officer Barker searching her car without permission. "He needs a warrant for that," she called to Reynolds, who was standing outside the cruiser. "Not if the vehicle is suspected stolen," he answered without looking at her. Barker emerged from her car holding her leather briefcase. Elaine felt a surge of anger. "That contains confidential court documents. You have no right to search it." The officers ignored her. Barker opened the briefcase on the hood of her car and began rifling through her papers. Reynolds joined him, both men examining her notes on the Wilson case. After several minutes, they seemed to find something of interest. Reynolds held up a document, showing it to his partner. They spoke in low voices Elaine couldn't hear. Then Reynolds approached the cruiser and opened the door. "What's this?" he asked, holding up a court order with her signature. "Exactly what it looks like. A court order signed by me." "By you?" Reynolds laughed. "So now you're not just a lawyer, but a judge too?" "Yes, I am. I'm Judge Elaine Montgomery of the County Circuit Court. Those are official court documents you're mishandling, which is a criminal offense." Reynolds stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from amusement to uncertainty. He looked back at the document, then at her driver's license, then at her face. "Nice try," he finally said, but his voice had lost its edge. "We'll sort this out at the station." He closed the door and returned to Barker. They had another whispered conversation, occasionally glancing at the papers and then at her. Elaine could see doubt creeping into their postures. Barker took out his phone and appeared to be looking something up. His expression changed dramatically. He showed his phone to Reynolds, whose shoulders visibly stiffened. They both looked at her through the cruiser window, their faces now masks of professional neutrality. Something had changed, but they weren't ready to admit their mistake yet. Reynolds got into the driver's seat while Barker continued packing up her belongings. Neither spoke to her as they pulled away from the curb. As they drove past Patricia's house, Elaine saw her sister standing on the front porch, phone to her ear, looking worried. Their eyes met briefly before the cruiser turned the corner. That was my sister, Elaine said. The one I told you I was visiting. Reynolds adjusted his rearview mirror to look at her but said nothing. The trip to the station was short and silent. Elaine used the time to gather her thoughts. By now, Patricia would be calling everyone. Robert, their other sister, probably the district attorney too. The situation would be resolved quickly, but Elaine wasn't thinking about herself anymore. She was thinking about all the other black men and women who'd been in this same position without her advantages. People who didn't have the district attorney's personal number. People whose word wasn't taken seriously simply because of the color of their skin. As the cruiser pulled into the station parking lot, Elaine made a decision. This incident wouldn't be swept under the rug. These officers wouldn't receive a quiet reprimand and continue their pattern of harassment. She would use every ounce of her authority to ensure real change came from this. The cruiser stopped. Reynolds turned off the engine but didn't immediately get out. "Judge Montgomery," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." "No, Officer Reynolds," Elaine replied calmly. "There was no misunderstanding. There was only prejudice and abuse of power. And we're going to address it properly, through the system." Reynolds exited the vehicle without responding. As he opened her door, Elaine could see other officers emerging from the station, including a captain with stars on his collar. The night was far from over. The police station buzzed with typical evening activity. Officers filing reports, phones ringing, the occasional raised voice from the holding cells down the hall. Elaine sat on a hard plastic chair, her hands still cuffed behind her back while Officers Reynolds and Barker spoke in hushed tones with Captain Wilson near the front desk. The captain's face had transformed from professional curiosity to alarm as the conversation progressed. Elaine could read body language well. It was an essential skill in her courtroom. Reynolds was defensive, standing with his arms crossed and chin jutted forward. Barker looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The captain's posture was rigid with tension. Several other officers had stopped what they were doing to watch. Word was spreading quickly through the station. She heard fragments of whispers. Circuit court judge. Pulled her over in Oakwood. They cuffed her. A young female officer approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, can I get you some water?" "I'd appreciate that," Elaine replied. "And perhaps someone could remove these handcuffs. They're completely unnecessary." The officer glanced toward the captain, who was still deep in conversation with Reynolds and Barker. "I'll need authorization, but I'll ask." She returned moments later with a paper cup of water and awkwardly held it to Elaine's lips since her hands were still restrained. The indignity of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. "Thank you," Elaine said after taking a sip. "What's your name, officer?" "Chen, ma'am." "Officer Lisa Chen." "Well, Officer Chen, I'd like to make my phone call now." "It's my right," Chen nodded. "Let me check with the captain." Before she could walk away, the group by the front desk broke apart. Captain Wilson approached, his face a mask of professional concern hiding obvious panic. "Judge Montgomery," he began, his voice carefully modulated. "I want to personally apologize for this misunderstanding. Is that what we're calling it?" Elaine replied coolly. The captain signaled to Officer Chen, who quickly produced a key and removed the handcuffs. Elaine rubbed her wrists, noting the red marks where the metal had dug into her skin. "May I have my belongings returned to me?" she asked. "Of course, right away." The captain snapped his fingers at a nearby desk sergeant. "Get Judge Montgomery's personal effects immediately." Reynolds and Barker stood off to the side, their earlier arrogance replaced by stiff formality. Reynolds couldn't meet her eyes. Barker stared at a point on the wall just above her head. "These officers," Elaine said, gesturing toward them, "conducted an illegal stop, searched my vehicle without consent or probable cause, examined confidential court documents, and arrested me without justification. I want their badge numbers in a formal complaint filed." Captain Wilson nodded. "Absolutely, Your Honor. We'll begin an internal investigation right away." "Internal investigations have a way of disappearing, Captain." "I'd like to make my phone call now." "Of course, but there's no need for that anymore. You're free to go. We can drive you back to your car or to your sister's house or—" "I'd still like to make my call," Elaine interrupted firmly, "and I'll need a private room to do so." The captain led her to a small conference room. "Take all the time you need, Judge Montgomery. Again, I want to express my deepest—" "Save it for the formal hearing, Captain." Elaine said as she closed the door. Alone at last, she took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling slightly, the first physical sign of the stress and anger she'd been suppressing. She allowed herself 30 seconds to feel it all. The humiliation of being handcuffed on a public street, the fury at the officer's casual racism, the bone-deep weariness of dealing with the same prejudices despite her position. 30 seconds, and then she composed herself again. She called District Attorney Washington first. "Elaine, where are you? Your sister's been calling me frantically." Washington's voice was concerned. "I'm at the Central Precinct Police Station. I was illegally stopped, searched, and arrested by 2 patrol officers in Oakwood Heights while driving to my sister's house." A beat of silence. Then, "You're joking. Do I sound like I'm joking, Michael?" Another pause. "Jesus Christ. Are you okay?" "Physically, yes. Professionally insulted and personally violated, also, yes. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Thank you. And Michael? This isn't going away quietly, nor should it. Hang tight." Her next call was to Patricia, who answered on the first ring. "Elaine, where are you? Robert's out driving around looking for you, and I've been calling everyone we know. I'm at the police station, Pat. I'm fine. They're releasing me soon." "The police station? What happened?" Elaine gave her a brief summary, trying to keep her tone matter-of-fact for her sister's sake. That's, Patricia struggled to find words. "It's unfortunately not surprising," Elaine finished for her. "Listen, Michael Washington is on his way here. I'll come to your house after we're done. Tell Robert to come home. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm sure. Just save me some of that peach cobbler." After hanging up, Elaine made one more call, to Judge Franklin Thomas, the chief judge of the circuit court and her direct supervisor. He needed to know why one of his judges would be filing a formal complaint against the police department. When she finished her calls, she stepped out of the conference room to find the station in a very different state than when she'd entered. District Attorney Washington had arrived and was standing in the middle of the room, radiating controlled fury. Captain Wilson looked like he wanted to disappear. Reynolds and Barker were nowhere to be seen. "Judge Montgomery," Washington said formally, though his eyes conveyed concern. "Are you ready to leave?" "Almost." "I need to file my formal complaint first." Captain Wilson stepped forward with a clipboard. "We've prepared the form for you, Your Honor." Elaine took the clipboard and read through the pre-filled complaint. It described a miscommunication and procedural oversight. She handed it back. "This isn't accurate. I'll need a blank form." "Perhaps we could discuss this in my office," the captain suggested, clearly hoping to move the increasingly public situation behind closed doors. "There's nothing to discuss. I need a blank complaint form, and I need the officers' badge numbers and full names." A fresh form was quickly produced. Elaine wrote a detailed account of the entire incident, using precise legal language to describe each violation of procedure and law. She listed the specific statutes and departmental policies that had been broken. When she finished, she signed her name with her customary clear, bold signature. "I'll need a copy of this," she said as she handed it to the captain. "Of course. We'll make one right away." While they waited, Washington spoke quietly to her. "You know they're going to try to bury this." "Let them try," Elaine replied. "I've documented everything and there were witnesses. Plus, I have a feeling their body cameras captured some interesting footage." Washington smiled grimly. "I've already submitted the request for that footage. They have 24 hours to produce it before I get a court order." "Which judge will you go to for that order?" Elaine asked with a small smile. "I was thinking Judge Hernandez. He's always been particular about proper police procedure." The captain returned with her copy of the complaint and her personal belongings. Her phone had several missed calls and messages, and her briefcase had been haphazardly repacked. The court documents no longer in their careful order. "Your vehicle has been brought here from Oakwood Heights," Captain Wilson said. "It's parked out front. Thank you. I'll also need the names of everyone who handled my briefcase and the court documents inside it. Those are confidential materials and their chain of custody has been compromised." The captain looked pained but nodded. "I'll have that information sent to your office tomorrow." "Today," Elaine corrected. "Email it to my clerk before midnight." As she and Washington walked toward the exit, she noticed a holding area where Reynolds and Barker sat, looking distinctly uncomfortable as an internal affairs officer questioned them. They saw her watching and quickly looked away. Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing after the stifling atmosphere of the station. Elaine took a deep breath. You okay to drive? Washington asked. Yes. I'm going to my sister's. She's probably worried sick. Want me to follow you? That's not necessary. But thank you, Michael, for coming so quickly. He touched her shoulder briefly. This shouldn't have happened. Not to anyone, but especially not to you. That's exactly the problem, Elaine replied. It shouldn't happen to anyone, but it does every day. The only difference is most people don't have the district attorney's personal cell number. Washington nodded soberly. What are you going to do? Elaine looked back at the police station. Follow through. Make sure those officers face real consequences. Use whatever influence I have to push for actual change in the department. The Wilson case is on your docket tomorrow. Do you want me to request a continuance? She considered this. No, life goes on. Justice doesn't wait. They parted ways in the parking lot. As Elaine drove toward her sister's house, she thought about the day ahead. She would sit on the bench in her robes, administering justice in a system that had just proven how unequal it could be. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone rang through the car speakers. It was Patricia again. I'm on my way now, Elaine said. Everything's sorted out. Robert's home. The kids are still up, worried about their auntie. Tell them I'm fine. And that peach cobbler better still be waiting for me. Patricia's voice softened. Always, and Elaine, I'm proud of you. Elaine smiled despite everything. Save that for when this is over. We're just getting started. As she drove through the quiet streets of Oakwood Heights for the second time that evening, she noticed the same police cruiser at the corner, different officers now watching her carefully as she passed. She maintained exactly the speed limit just as before, but this time she looked directly at them as she drove by. Some battles were fought in courtrooms with legal arguments and precedents. Others began on quiet suburban streets with blue lights flashing in a rearview mirror. Both were equally important. Elaine turned onto her sister's street, spotting the warm lights of Patricia's house ahead. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight there would be family, cobbler, and the quiet planning of what came next. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Patricia's guest bedroom, where Elaine had spent the night. She'd stayed up late with her sister and brother-in-law, recounting the events in detail, accepting their outrage and concern, but ultimately steering the conversation toward action rather than anger. Now, as she prepared for court, she moved with the same deliberate precision she always did. Her routine was sacred: a hot shower, a light breakfast, a review of the day's cases. Today's primary hearing was the Wilson property dispute, but there were also several motion hearings and 2 arraignments on her afternoon docket. Patricia hovered in the kitchen doorway as Elaine sipped her coffee and reviewed her notes. You could take a day off. You know, Patricia said. After what happened, that's exactly why I can't take a day off, Elaine replied without looking up. The system doesn't pause because one judge had a bad night. A bad night? They arrested you for driving while black. They handcuffed you. They violated your rights. Elaine finally looked up from her papers. Yes, they did. And today I'll put on my robes and demonstrate what justice actually looks like. That's more powerful than staying home. Patricia sighed but nodded. Robert can drive you to the courthouse. No need. I have my car. After what happened, I'd feel better if... Pat, Elaine interrupted gently. I appreciate the concern, but I need to do this normally, just like any other day. Her sister's worried expression didn't change, but she didn't argue further. At least let me iron your blouse, Elaine smiled. That I'll accept. An hour later, she was walking up the courthouse steps in her customary navy blue suit, leather briefcase in hand. She'd received several messages from Judge Thomas, who wanted to discuss the incident, but she'd scheduled that meeting for the afternoon. The Wilson case took priority. Her clerk, Thomas, was waiting in her chambers with a stack of additional files. Morning, Judge, he said, then paused, studying her face. Everything okay? You look tired. I'm fine, she replied. Any changes to the docket? Thomas hesitated, then continued. No changes to the Wilson hearing, but there's been an addition to the 10:30 arraignments. 2 police officers charged with evidence tampering in a drug case. De Washington added it late yesterday. Elaine raised an eyebrow. Officers' names? Thomas consulted his list. Reynolds and Barker. Central Precinct. Elaine stared at him. Reynolds and Barker? Yes, do you know them? She almost laughed at the absurdity. You could say that. Michael didn't mention this last night. Last night? Thomas looked confused. Never mind. Pull the case file for me, please. When Thomas left, Elaine reached for her phone and called Washington. You added Reynolds and Barker to my docket? She said when he answered. Good morning to you too, Elaine. Don't good morning me. What are you playing at? Washington's voice was calm. The evidence tampering case against them has been pending for weeks. It was always going to be assigned to someone on the bench. Random assignment put it on your docket. Random assignment? Yesterday of all days? The timing is interesting, I'll admit. It's impossible. I need to recuse myself immediately. Of course you do, Washington agreed, but not until they're in your courtroom. Elaine understood then. You want them to see me on the bench. I want them to understand exactly who they handcuffed last night, who they disrespected, who they violated. And then yes, you'll recuse yourself as is proper. She considered this. It wasn't unethical. She would indeed recuse herself the moment the conflict became apparent. But the point would be made. This feels like theater, Michael. Sometimes justice requires a dramatic flourish. After hanging up, Elaine sat quietly, thinking. Then she called Judge Thomas again. Richard, I need to discuss something before court begins. At 9 a.m. sharp, Elaine entered her courtroom through the rear door. The room rose as the bailiff called out, All rise! The Honorable Judge Elaine Montgomery presiding in the Circuit Court of the 7th Judicial District. She took her place on the bench, adjusted her robes, and surveyed the room. The Wilson case was first with both parties and their attorneys present. Mr. Wilson sat stiffly in his expensive suit, while Mrs. Turner, his neighbor, clutched her handbag nervously. Their dispute over 5 feet of property line had consumed months of court time and thousands in legal fees. Good morning, Elaine began. Before we continue with Wilson versus Turner, I'd like to remind everyone present that this court operates on principles of mutual respect, adherence to law and equal treatment under that law, regardless of a person's position, status, or appearance. She looked directly at each attorney as she spoke. These principles are not mere ideals but requirements. When they are violated, our entire system of justice is undermined. The attorneys exchanged puzzled glances, clearly wondering about this unusual opening statement. Elaine continued with the Wilson hearing, listening to final arguments about property surveys, historical records, and the placement of a particularly contentious hedge. By 10:25, she had issued her ruling, a compromise that seemed to satisfy neither party completely, which usually meant it was fair. As the Wilsons and Turners filed out, the courtroom began to fill again for the 10:30 arraignments. Elaine took a brief recess, returning to her chambers to collect herself. She reviewed the evidence tampering charges against officers Reynolds and Barker, allegations that they had mishandled drug evidence in a case from 3 months ago. The charges were serious, potentially career-ending if proven. At precisely 10:30, she returned to the bench. The courtroom was again called to order. District Attorney Washington was present now, sitting at the prosecution table with a junior attorney. The defense table was still empty. The bailiff approached the bench. Judge, the defendants are being brought up from processing. Elaine nodded. We'll proceed with case number 2025 CR 8734 when they arrive. She occupied herself with reviewing notes for the next case. Deliberately not looking up when the door at the back of the courtroom opened, she heard footsteps, murmured instructions from court officers, the scrape of chairs at the defense table. Only when the bailiff announced, the state versus officers James Reynolds and Peter Barker, on charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice, did she raise her eyes. Reynolds saw her first. His face, previously set in the confident expression of a police officer who expected professional courtesy from the court, transformed in an instant. His mouth opened slightly, eyes widening in shock. He nudged Barker, who was still arranging papers with his attorney. When Barker looked up, he froze completely. Elaine met their gaze calmly, her expression professional and neutral. Good morning, gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom. I see from the file that you're both officers with the Central Precinct. Their attorney, a veteran police union lawyer named Griffith, stood quickly. Yes, Your Honor. Officers Reynolds and Barker are decorated members of the force with clean records. Interesting, Elaine remarked. She turned to the clerk. Thomas, please note for the record that I will be recusing myself from this case due to a conflict of interest. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The defense attorney looked confused. Your Honor, may I ask the nature of the conflict? You may. Officers Reynolds and Barker conducted an unlawful traffic stop of my vehicle last night in Oakwood Heights, searched my car without consent or probable cause, examined confidential court documents without authorization, and detained me without justification. The murmur became a wave of whispers. Griffith paled visibly. I was not aware of this incident, Your Honor. Clearly, Elaine replied. I've filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. Judge Wilson will take over this case, effective immediately. She gathered her papers, but before standing, she addressed the officers directly. The law applies equally to everyone in my courtroom, regardless of their occupation, their status, or the color of their skin. I suggest you remember that. With that, she rose and exited the courtroom. Behind her, chaos erupted as reporters who had been covering routine court proceedings suddenly realized they had a much bigger story. Washington remained seated at the prosecution table, making no effort to hide his satisfied expression. Reynolds and Barker sat stunned, their careers now in serious jeopardy on multiple fronts. In her chambers, Elaine took a moment to breathe. Thomas knocked and entered without waiting. Judge, there are reporters asking for statements, and Judge Wilson wants to know what the hell is going on. And the police commissioner's office is on line 1. Tell the reporters no comment. Brief Judge Wilson on the basics and send him the case file. And tell the commissioner I'll call back after my meeting with Judge Thomas. Thomas hesitated. Can I ask what happened? Elaine gave him a tired smile. A reality check happened, Thomas. Something long overdue. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. News is already spreading, you okay? She typed back. Fine. Justice works in unexpected ways sometimes. As she prepared for her meeting with Judge Thomas, Elaine reflected on the looks on Reynolds and Barker's faces when they recognized her. It wasn't about personal satisfaction. She took no pleasure in their distress. It was about accountability. For too long, officers like them had operated with impunity, facing no real consequences for their actions. That ended today, at least in this case. The evidence tampering charges would proceed under Judge Wilson. The complaint she filed would trigger an investigation. The body camera footage, which Washington had already secured, would provide irrefutable evidence, but more importantly, 2 officers had been confronted with the reality of their prejudice in the most direct way possible. They had profiled, detained, and disrespected a judge based solely on her race, and then found themselves facing that same judge in her courtroom. It wasn't revenge. It was education. Judge Thomas was waiting in his office when she arrived. The older judge rose to greet her, his expression grave. Elaine, I've heard fragments of what happened. I'd like the full story. It's quite simple, Richard, she said as she took a seat. I experienced what countless black citizens experience every day. The only difference is that I have the power to do something about it. As she recounted the events of the previous night, she noticed Thomas's expression shift from concern to outrage to determination. What do you need from me? He asked when she finished. Support for a broader initiative. This isn't about 2 officers. It's about a culture that enables them. Thomas nodded slowly. You have it. Whatever you need. As she left his office, Elaine felt a weight lifting. The incident wasn't over. There would be investigations, hearings, possibly even a civil suit. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, she felt something that had been missing from the justice system for too long. Hope for actual change. 6 months passed. The trees in Oakwood Heights had shed their summer leaves, replaced by the rich golds and reds of autumn. Elaine sat in her sister's kitchen, just as she had the night of the incident, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. They actually fired them? Patricia asked, setting down her coffee mug with a thump. Both of them? Not just fired, Elaine replied. The review board recommended termination, and the DA's office proceeded with the criminal charges. They took a plea deal last week, no jail time, but they'll never work in law enforcement again. Robert shook his head in amazement. I never thought I'd see the day. Usually these things just disappear. Not this time, Elaine said. The body camera footage was impossible to ignore. You can't argue with video showing 2 officers explicitly profiling someone and then searching their car without consent. The footage had been released to the public 3 months ago. after Elaine's formal complaint had triggered an internal investigation. What began as a single incident had quickly expanded into a comprehensive review of both officers' conduct over their careers. The pattern was unmistakable. Reynolds and Barker had disproportionately stopped Black and Hispanic drivers, conducted more searches on their vehicles, and issued more citations compared to their peers. "I still can't believe they didn't recognize you," Patricia's daughter said from across the table. At 15, Zoe had followed the case closely, suddenly seeing her aunt's work in a new light. "That's exactly the point, Zoe," Elaine replied. "They didn't see me as a judge or even as a person deserving of respect. They saw only my skin color. And then you showed up on the bench," Robert laughed. "I would have paid good money to see their faces." "It wasn't about embarrassing them," Elaine said, though she couldn't help smiling slightly at the memory. "It was about accountability." Accountability had indeed been the theme of the past 6 months. After the body camera footage went public, community outrage had forced the police department to address long-standing issues of racial profiling. Judge Thomas had supported Elaine's push for a judicial oversight committee focused specifically on police conduct. The City Council had approved funding for improved police training programs, with a focus on recognizing and preventing bias. Elaine's phone buzzed with a text from District Attorney Washington. Reform proposal passed. Full funding approved. She smiled and showed the message to her family. "That's the new training program?" Robert asked. Elaine nodded. "All officers will now undergo mandatory bias training every year, not just during their initial academy days. And they're implementing a new system to flag officers who show patterns of questionable stops or arrests. All because they picked the wrong Black woman to harass," Patricia said with a mixture of pride and lingering anger. "No," Elaine corrected her. "All because enough people finally decided that what happens to any Black person matters, not just judges." That had been Elaine's focus from the beginning, ensuring that her case wasn't treated as special simply because of her position. At every press conference, every hearing, every meeting with city officials, she had emphasized the same point. Her experience was not unique, only the outcome was. "Will you speak at the community forum tomorrow night?" Zoe asked. "I'm giving the opening address," Elaine confirmed. "It's important that people understand this isn't the end of something, but the beginning." The community forum was the first in a series of public meetings designed to improve relations between police and residents, particularly in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. Elaine had worked closely with community leaders and police representatives to establish a framework for ongoing dialogue. Later that evening, as Elaine drove home from her sister's house, taking the same route through Oakwood Heights that had led to her arrest, she noticed a police cruiser parked at the familiar corner. This time, however, the officer behind the wheel nodded respectfully as she passed. Progress came in small moments as well as big reforms. At home, Elaine reviewed her notes for tomorrow's speech. The words needed to strike the right balance, acknowledging the pain and injustice of the past while creating hope for the future. This wasn't about her story alone, but about all the stories that never made headlines, all the people who didn't have the power of a judge's robe to protect them. Her doorbell rang, surprising her. It was late for visitors. Through the peephole, she saw Officer Lisa Chen, the young female officer who had given her water at the station 6 months ago. "Officer Chen," Elaine said as she opened the door. "This is unexpected. I'm sorry to disturb you at home, Judge Montgomery," Chen replied, looking uncomfortable. "I wouldn't have come, but I thought you'd want to know before tomorrow's forum." "Know what?" "Captain Wilson is being promoted to deputy chief. The announcement goes out tomorrow morning." Elaine frowned. "The same Captain Wilson who tried to bury my complaint? Who wrote that ridiculous report minimizing what happened?" Chen nodded. "The same one. They're calling it a recognition of his leadership during a challenging period of departmental transition. Challenging period that he helped create," Elaine said flatly. "Exactly. A lot of us in the department, especially the younger officers and officers of color, we're upset about it. It sends the wrong message when we're supposed to be changing the culture." Elaine studied Chen's face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you made a difference," Chen said simply. "Before your case, I was planning to keep my head down, just get through each day. After watching how you handled everything, it reminded me why I became an officer in the first place. To protect people, to do what's right. And now Now I think we need to make sure these changes stick. Not just new training videos in public forums, but real accountability at every level, including the leadership. Elaine invited Chen in and they talked for over an hour. The young officer shared her experiences in the department, the casual sexism she faced as a woman, the pressure to conform to the existing culture, the unwritten rules about which neighborhoods deserved protection and which deserved surveillance. By the time Chen left, Elaine had completely rewritten her speech for the forum. This wasn't just about individual officers like Reynolds and Barker. It was about systems that rewarded the wrong behaviors, promoted the wrong people, and perpetuated the wrong values. The next evening, the community center was packed. Community members, police officers, city officials, and media representatives filled every seat. The tension in the room was palpable. Decades of mistrust couldn't be erased by a single forum. When Elaine took the podium, she saw faces both hostile and hopeful. She saw Officer Chen sitting with a group of younger officers. She saw Captain Wilson, soon-to-be Deputy Chief Wilson, looking smug in the front row. She saw her sister and her family. She saw people from neighborhoods across the city, some who had traveled miles to be there. 6 months ago, she began, I was driving to my sister's house for dinner when I was illegally stopped, searched and arrested by 2 officers who saw only the color of my skin, not the content of my character or the years I've spent serving justice in this community. She paused, looking directly at Captain Wilson. Those officers faced consequences for their actions, as they should have. But this evening, I'm not here to talk about 2 individuals who made bad choices. I'm here to talk about the systems that shaped those choices, the culture that enabled them, and the leadership that protected them. A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't the conciliatory speech many had expected. True reform doesn't come from a few training sessions or community forums, though those are important steps. True reform comes when we examine who we reward, who we promote, and what behaviors we celebrate. For the next 15 minutes, Elaine spoke plainly about the challenges ahead. She acknowledged the difficult and dangerous work police officers did every day, but she also outlined specific changes needed in leadership, accountability, and community oversight. The measure of our success won't be policies written or programs funded, she concluded. It will be the experience of an ordinary black citizen driving through Oakwood Heights, or any neighborhood, without fear that the color of their skin will make them a target. The applause was thunderous. Though not universal, Captain Wilson sat stone-faced while Chen and her fellow officers stood clapping. Community members who had entered warily were now nodding in agreement. As Elaine stepped away from the podium, Washington approached her. That wasn't quite the unifying message the planning committee had in mind, he said with a raised eyebrow. Unity without truth is just comfortable silence, she replied. We've had enough of that. Washington smiled slowly. You know they'll fight back. Wilson's promotion is just the beginning. I'm counting on it, Elaine said. Real change never comes without resistance. In the weeks and months that followed, that resistance materialized in predictable ways. Budget allocations for new training programs were questioned. The Oversight Committee faced procedural delays. Elaine herself was accused of judicial activism and personal bias, but something had shifted in the community. More officers like Chen began speaking up about problems within the department. More citizens attended police commission meetings and city council sessions. More judges examined police conduct with increased scrutiny. 1 year to the day after Elaine was handcuffed on a quiet street in Oakwood Heights, she returned to that exact spot. She parked her car and stood on the sidewalk where it had happened. A patrol car slowed as it approached. A different officer, a different time, but the same location. The officer rolled down his window. Everything okay, ma'am? Yes, officer. Just taking a moment to reflect. He nodded and drove on without asking for identification, without assuming she didn't belong. It was a small moment, but meaningful. Not the end of the journey toward justice, but a sign that the path was heading in the right direction. Elaine got back in her car and drove to her sister's house for dinner. There would be peach cobbler waiting and more work to do tomorrow. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they did turn, especially when pushed with purpose and persistence. Some battles were fought in courtrooms, with legal arguments and precedents. Others began on quiet suburban streets with blue lights flashing in a rearview mirror. Both were equally important in the long arc toward justice.